Go here. All right, let's go. All right, everybody. Thank you guys for coming to another OWASP Toronto chapter meetup. Before we get to the presentation today, just a couple of housekeeping things. For starters, we have a feedback form in the YouTube description here. So click that. You can use it to provide your thoughts on the event, suggestions for other events. And this is also the form you use if you're looking for CPE credits. We haven't scheduled the next OWASP Toronto chapter meetup, but stay tuned for that because we'll be bringing that to you shortly. If you guys have any presentations during the have any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop that into the live chat, which is to the right of this video on YouTube here. As well, if you are looking for work or you're hiring, feel free to advertise that in the chat now as well. This video will be recorded and shared at later once it's finished. I think that's it for housekeeping. So good luck, Craig and Amalia. Floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Hello, everyone. We are just going to do very brief introductions so that because our intros are on LinkedIn and I have a couple of slides, so we want to get straight into the presentation. My name is Amalia. I do a lot of things, but mostly lately in the last 10 years, privacy. And that's going to be my take on what's been happening in the last 6 months of our life.
And hi, guys. My name is Craig Barretto. I'm a security consultant and co-founder of Proact Security. From my angle on this, I'm looking at some mobile apps and looking at the technical implementation of privacy when it comes to actual implementation and security controls.
Okay, so I'm just going to turn my video off so I can advance the slides. We have a very light agenda. We're going to talk about privacy and security concerns for the post-lockdown world and why do we need to care. And you can ask questions as we go along. We'll try to answer them as we progress through the slides. Okay, so the first part, privacy and security concerns for the post-lockdown world. In order to understand that, I think we need to look at what happened during the lockdown and then kind of how we're getting out of that. So as you have experienced, all of us have, staying at home and working in a completely different way has affected us on personal levels, as well as of course, the workplaces, the employers, right? So a lot of us weren't maybe working from home, and so video conferencing, we had to have parties online with workers, or the Friday 5 o'clock, and that was very unusual, right? There were people that lost their jobs, and so it was difficult because they were also very isolated at home. That's also been becoming and has become a headache for the organizations. And then all of us started ordering everything online. And so that has added a ton of personal information. I have to say I've been very reluctant to order stuff from on the internet. And then I finally just caved in and I started ordering almost everything. People have started posting a lot more. So they've been starting to tell their story and a lot more personal stuff. And of course, a lot of anxiety and even for some of us that had family around, we still felt quite a little bit weird being at home. And, mentally it was different. We did not interact with our colleagues anymore the way we did before. For the people that used to go to work every day and for the employers, now they were in a full pandemic. I bet you a lot of them never tested their pandemic plan. So this was their first test. And I hope it was successful. Craig can attest to there's been heightened attacks, security attacks. And they've also, I've just found out in the news lately that because a lot of organizations have come up with ideas to collaborate on a vaccine or a course of treatment for the virus. There had been attacks to people to ask for money to donate. And so HR has been going crazy on two fronts. They had to prepare massive packages of exiting employees, and some employees have been, furloughed. Some had reduced hours. So it's just been, crazy time for that. Certain projects have been put on hold, and I'll come back with a question on that. And then, of course, massive rush to build everything e-commerce style. So people that weren't doing transactions online all of a sudden found themselves in the need of having a website so they can continue their business. So that involved a lot more collection of personal information. And I mean, Craig will tell you, they were not prepared to protect the personal information they took from us. And one thing that really bothered me, and I think it's been happening mostly in the States, that some employers took it upon themselves to install push down tools to track key strokes at home and track employees to make sure they stay in front of the computer for as many hours as they're supposed to. So I just want to ask a question, and if you guys want to just chime in on the chat, what do you think were the projects or the areas in the business, hint, the topic of today, that fell by the wayside? And they said, oh, that's not important now. We can just defer it a little bit. And the answer is not security. Anyone want to guess? Do we have any answers, Craig? Any brave souls?
No, none.
Okay, I'll tell you, privacy. So people thought, we could dispense with privacy. It's not so important. We don't need those projects in privacy anymore. All right, so that's kind of what's been going on.
When we looked at this, and like Amalia was saying, there's been this rush and for e-commerce, and I think what we've seen now is that a lot of organizations are starting to move to this online first, right? So everyone's rushing to put everything online, with a lot of medical facilities, whether they're local clinics, hospitals, health organizations, everyone's moving everything online. I know personally, now doctor appointments are either virtual or they're just over the phone. You're using video conferencing equipment, and I'm not specifically talking about, certain products like Zoom or Teams, but they're also using other third-party applications. Funny story, one of them was actually one we pen tested before. So that was really interesting to see. And then, how are companies actually managing this data? They're collecting a lot of it, and what we're finding is that they're collecting now. Let's say, for example, we're talking health. They're taking a photo of your health card, which they never used to have before. You usually handed someone your health card. They would look at it, verify that the information was correct, and hand it back to you. So now what they're doing is they want you to scan a copy of it and upload it to their platform, and then they would verify your ID. In other cases now, they're taking your requisition form. So if we're talking healthcare again, your requisition form will kind of test your needs to be done. What kind of things are they checking if they're doing a blood test? And one of the big things that are coming out of this is that it's a rush. It's a mad rush, and mistakes are happening. So what we're seeing now, and a good example is like most local clinics, that draw blood, they've closed. So now, and I've seen this in Mississauga, is that in order to schedule a blood test, you have to go through Life Labs. And if any of you are aware, Life Labs had a breach at the end of last year, which exposed about 15 million Canadians' information, including lab results, PII, like your date of birth, home address, email address, and credentials. So I'm not going to bash Life Labs. organizations do have breaches, but what we're seeing is companies are making this mad rush to things. So another good example is this website. Now, I'm not going to tell you guys what that site is, but it was a site that I was directed to from my doctor's office. First thing I saw when I went to this site was it asked me for my health card, which I now have to upload, and asked me for my requisition form. The problem with this site was it screamed at me, and when I decided to look under the covers, I found that it was a WordPress site. And if many of you know, WordPress, there are updates almost monthly, sometimes weekly, and this website was completely out of date. It dated back to 2017. So being the person that I am, I tried to reach out to somebody to see if they could update the site or if they were aware of the issue, and all I got was radio silence. Eventually, I got on the phone with somebody, and they told me that the site was completely secure. Obviously, they're probably not in security. They weren't. They were just a technician. But needless to say, after talking to them for a little bit, someone decided, okay, you know what? You don't need to fill out this form. You can just come in, and we'll give you what you need. I didn't have to show them my driver's license or my health card. So I think what we're seeing is this mad rush, and a lot of organizations aren't ready, like Amalia said, and things are being done fast, and security is being kind of put on the back burner. Some organizations are trying, but what we're finding is that there might not be someone that's focused strictly on security at the forefront to say, okay, this is how things should be done, and to ensure our customer data is being protected.
Yeah, that's very true. So we all went through the first 3 months when we didn't know what was going to happen day to day. And then after about those 3 months, things started to relax a little bit. However, people are still working from home. Some companies have decided, you know what, we're not going back to the old way. We're going to just work from home. So those technologies like Zoom are still there with all the goods and the bads. Some people may need to go back to work because their employer says go back to work. But think about an employer that may decide, I want to take their temperature. There is very contradictory guidance around that, if any. Some people maybe can't fully come back to work. So lots of things have happened on a personal level. And some people may come back to work in a reduced schedule because maybe they are very impacted on mental health or on other levels. What that means, it means that organizations now have a whole new slew of things to deal with, including the fact that what we are going through as individuals is very personal to us. And even though it impacts or not impacts the employer, there are certain things that we may not want to reveal. We may not want to disclose. So, for example, going back to work, from an HR perspective, they have HR files. They may want to write stuff in them, and the question is, what is it that they can write or cannot write? The knowledgeable professionals that I just talked about in the 2 slides ago have been maybe put on a reduced work schedule because we don't need those privacy people just now. They're not vital to the business. So those privacy professionals are not around to advise how this personal information can be collected, how it needs to be protected, who can it be disclosed to, and so on. One of the things that I've been finding in my reading and research on privacy, and just on an aside, I also teach at University of Toronto. I teach a privacy certificate program, so it's 3 courses. around the world, there's known that there are these 8 dimensions of privacy. And so when we talk about generally privacy, it's not just privacy of my feelings or privacy of my thoughts. It's privacy as a person. It's privacy, physical privacy, privacy of behaviors or association. You know, if I want this political party or whatever, this particular association, privacy of data and image. So there's many aspects, facets of privacy. And when, for example, a company is not careful about all of these and something happens, a breach, or a privacy commissioner or a privacy regulator comes knocking, when they look at the compliance program, they look at how that organization protected all of these dimensions in all of the business processes that collect and carry through personal information. So the question of the moment is, what is more important? World health, keeping everybody alive and not getting more infections, or they think, or giving tons of personal information so that we all can be protected and stay alive. So it's what kind of protection, and what can go wrong in this kind of a scenario? First of all, it should not be personal health versus personal privacy. It should be personal health and personal privacy, and it's possible. So there's a lot of proposed contact tracing apps. I have read about so many. I'm dizzy of how many I have read about and seen, and initiatives and so on. Then there's been a lot of unrest, and we have seen that some of the surveillance is now turned on to the demonstrators, which was not something that we thought about, you know, even up until to the pandemic. And then there's something that was enacted recently, particularly in the United States, which is biometric laws, and what is the enforcement around that, around protecting the personal information related to our biometrics. So this is one of the most interesting reads of sources that I found. Let me just move this out of the way so that it doesn't obstruct the text. So somebody wrote a very comprehensive paper about contact tracing mobile app the right way, the proper way, where it explains clearly what the benefits are going with the infection chain. As you can see there, you know, how the infection can spread, what are all the options that have to happen, and they come up with some guiding principles. That has to be a consent-based participation. The app has to be simple and transparent, easy to deploy, has to have anonymity guaranteed, and a federated infrastructure so that it can be actually effective, you know, everywhere whereas people move. So the other thing that is very important about this type of app, so part of the guiding principle is that it cannot infringe upon your privacy. So whatever the settings are, whatever we need to enable, it has to absolutely protect anonymity. Okay, so here's the moment when, sorry guys, the presentation gets a little stuck sometimes. So it has to be restarted. One second here. All right, so let's go back from here. All right, so so in terms of what we see as requirements, right, from a privacy perspective, we need to have accurate and reliable data and proximity data. Of course, anonymity of users from other users, because the point is, why do we need to know the who if that's not going to help? What is the end goal for these kind of contact tracing apps? So some of them are disaster recipes because they're not thinking through exactly what we're after. Anonymity of users from a central authority. We don't want this to become some sort of central repository of people being collected somewhere that maybe they've been infected, whatever. Which goes to the point of assurance there is no perceived government surveillance, and not having massive government databases. That really, I think, is a very big concern, mostly in the US. And the concern of what can happen with that massive collection of data should the government have it in one central location. From a security and architecture perspective, the risk of eavesdropping and injection of bogus messages. So, as you know, there's some notification involved in these kinds of apps, and that has to be very well controlled and secured. Where's the data stored? And going back to that, no central location. Where's it stored and who can access it? Ability to verify that the data is correct. Again, individuals identified as anonymous, and this paper proposes a risk score and actions being taken as a result of that risk score, which is much better than identifying the who, because we don't need that. So based on the risk score, the user tracing information is either deleted or a message is sent to the mobile app, so very anonymized.
So in preparation for this talk, I decided to look at some contract tracing apps that were out in the market. I knew about the Alberta Health Services app. Not sure if everyone's aware of that, but it is an iOS app that was reskinned of a version of an app called Blue Trace, which is out of Singapore. The app is built strictly for iOS. It only works when the app is open. And so because it was on iOS and I don't like testing on iPhones, I decided to scrap it and look at what other apps were there. And so BC Health's COVID-19 support app kind of caught my eye, which is managed and made by a company called Thrive Health. So they're out in Vancouver. So first thing I did was I downloaded the app, installed it on my Android test phone, and connected it to my web proxy. You could use Zap, or in my case, I use Burp, and I started looking around. So the app is designed to give you timely updates and news within BC about COVID. And you're also able to answer health questionnaires and get personalized recommendations. So in this case, what you could do is you could go through and there's one of the questionnaires that I filled out was, have I come in contact with somebody that was diagnosed with COVID or showing symptoms of COVID-19? When I went through the entire workflow, what shocked me was every request and response that I made and received from Thrive Health, those requests and responses were sent to a third-party analytics platform. So when I said that I exhibited all the symptoms of COVID-19, the response I received was call 911, and what I saw was everything, all of those questions, all of my answers were sent to a third party. As soon as I gave the app access to my GPS coordinates, all of that went as well. So the analytics platform had my IP address, it had my device ID, it had a fingerprint of my device. So we're talking my Android phone. It included, the battery level, what Wi-Fi access point I was connected to. Was I on Wi-Fi or LTE? How much hard drive space there was on my phone? And then, it had my GPS coordinates, and then it had, call 911. So everything that I had shared with, BC Health or Thrive Health was then, provided to this third party. So after I found this out, I I thought, okay, you know what? Let me email the privacy department at Thrive and see if they were aware of this. And the response I got was that they were aware that there's a discrepancy by what they say in their privacy policy and what they're actually doing, and that they're working on fixing it. What this indicated to me right away was there's a high probability that what they did was they loaded the default SDK for, the software development kit for this behavioral analytics platform, and they injected it into their app. They just embedded it in their app, and then when they looked at the analytics platform, they saw all the data that they needed or that they wanted, and they moved forward. So I think so when they responded back to me, they also, so when I told them about all these issues, they said, you know what, we're looking to remove the GPS coordinates. And I was like, well, what about my answers? Like, you're capturing everyone's responses. They then replied and said, okay, you know what, we're looking to probably just take this analytics platform out of our SDK altogether. So they were going to remove the tracking, period. I guess the question becomes, like, did they realize that they were doing that? And by default, this analytics platform collected all this data of all these people that were already using the app, and they weren't really aware that all this data was being shared. So as a consumer or a user or a patient that is using this app, their data has now been shared with this analytics platform. And this analytics platform isn't just used by BC, right? It's used by other organizations throughout the world, like Under Armour and I think maybe Netflix. So yeah, there's quite a few organizations that are also using this platform, and I'm sure that these analytics platforms or these companies get to benefit from all this data that's being collected. Not to say that Netflix needs to know that how you were diagnosed with COVID, but other organizations might be able to figure out a way to provide proper advertising to you. So
yeah, so all of these things that are that you have uncovered, Craig, they prove concern to me in terms of proper privacy by design, and really looking at what exactly do we need to obtain, what is the minimum information that we need for this, not what are all the things that we're gonna have the luxury of doing because we collected so much information. That is absolutely not okay with any privacy legislation. BC has very strong privacy legislation and health-related legislation. So I am actually super surprised that the BC Privacy Commissioner hasn't come down on these people like a ton of bricks. It is not okay to not put in the notice that you may collect other pieces of information for analytics. And the thing is, I think they didn't say it because actually it wouldn't be legal to collect all that stuff. It's not required, definitely, for the end goal that they have. So I thought about talking a little bit about demystifying this Bluetooth technology in kind of privacy by design mode. You're going to hear me saying privacy by design a lot. It's because in these particular apps, it is so important to really think every step of the way, what is the impact? What is the potential harm from the personal information that you have at your disposal? So there's the Bluetooth low energy way of using this technology. It's harder for the governments to exploit through the mobile phones because I don't leave my Bluetooth on. I only use it to connect my Spotify outside in my backyard. So I don't have my Bluetooth on everywhere I go. And the operating systems of mobile phone apps have been designed to limit the exploitation of Bluetooth, which is, thank you for those operating system companies. They thought this through. So then there's the centralized systems, which keep proximity data locally on the mobile phone. until the person indicates, well, I'm not feeling well, I think I have COVID, and then the data gets uploaded centrally. However, there is a big question mark about who makes the decision to inform the health authorities, because that, again, is a big can of worms. Then there's the decentralized systems that could also feed data centrally if you're required to enter data manually in the app and presume that access to tests isn't a problem. So contact notifications are sent out with a positive test result. It generally keeps the proximity data on devices both before and after diagnosis. And it's for country-wide spread testing to be conducted. So there's the two ways. The core decision here is whether or not to notify others, and who makes that decision. Centralized apps use some automated decision making to determine whether you're at risk, and then decide to notify other people or phones. The decentralized apps actually require a test result before sending those notifications. Okay, so for that, we have some new exceptional rules. Limit by law and by design the number of purposes and uses for an app. For example, an app we need to trust shouldn't be used for quarantine enforcement, or, as you have seen, for tracking demonstrators. That wasn't there when I wrote the slides. The other rule, exceptional rule, ask users to upload data sparingly, make it clear to them why each piece is important. Now, that's true privacy by design. That's true choice and notice and choice, as we call it. One of the fair information principles. Delete the data once the pandemic is over, or once that situation has resolved, or there was a false alarm or whatever. And go further and delete the capabilities as well. Apps and APIs alike should be removed when this is done, rather than try to find another purpose for them to exist. So it has to be very, very specific to this particular situation.
So sometime at the end of May, Google and Apple announced that they were going to do an exposure notification platform together. Now, what this allowed people to do was to have their iPhone or Android devices work together to kind of create somewhat of a decentralized model for contact tracing. If you have an Android phone, you may have already seen this on your device. If you go to settings, Google, you should see something called COVID-19 exposure notifications. On iPhone, it's under settings, health, and then I think it's called COVID-19 exposure logging. So these aren't apps in themselves, but this is more of a mechanism designed to allow our local health authorities or our regional health authorities to build an app. Again, Google isn't releasing this to everyone. They're only releasing it to the health authorities, to build an app that will allow for contact tracing using Bluetooth. There's no GPS tracking. And what it's designed to do is your phone will create a random ID every 15 minutes. And what will happen is, using Bluetooth, I know Amalia doesn't use Bluetooth, but for example, people, if you have a smartphone or you just have Bluetooth in your car, a lot of people leave Bluetooth on. So what this will do is, if you come in close proximities with somebody, so let's say you're grocery shopping, your phone will randomly generate an ID and will share that with nearby devices. So each phone will have this random ID, and it'll keep a table of when that ID was in contact, what the power level was, so the signal, like how close that proximity may have been, and then every 15 minutes it'll create a new ID. Now, once someone is diagnosed with COVID-19, they will then opt in So they're not automatically, their notification is sent out. They opt in to say, I want to let my regional health or local health authority know that I've been diagnosed with COVID. And then what it'll do is, using the IDs that are in its phone for the last 14 days, a notification will then be sent out to everyone that was in close proximity. Again, everyone has to opt in to say that they consent to notifying their health authority that they were diagnosed, but they're actually not telling them who they are. And everyone's device, every phone that was coming that has come in contact with, they won't know who it was. Now, if it's two people and your device only has one ID in it, then yes, that person will know who it was that gave them that they may have been exposed to. But if we're talking hundreds of people, or 50 people, let's say in a grocery store or in a line waiting to get into the grocery store, or whatever the case may be, you will never be able to. You wouldn't be able to track who it was that you came in close contact with. So the idea here is that they've completely they've masked your identity, and they've prevented sharing of any sort of knowledge as to who you came in contact with, and essentially protected your data in that sense. Further to that, I think it was about last week or the week before, Canada announced that they are launching a contact tracing app that will be leveraging this. Some organizations decided that they were going to try, or health authorities decided they would try to build their own. And I think the UK last week decided that they're going to stop, and they're just going to, likely use the exposure notification that Google and Apple have provided.
Right. So on June 18th, our Prime Minister of Canada announced that there will be an app for Canadians. And what we all privacy professionals were so delighted to hear is that he actually seemed to really understand and be conversant with the privacy issues. So I'm quoting from an article about his announcement. And he said, because it's completely anonymous, because it's low maintenance, doesn't drain the phone battery, because it is completely respectful of your privacy, including no location services or geotagging of any sort, people can be confident that this is an easy measure that they can have to continue to keep us all safe as we reopen businesses. So it is very good to hear the head of a country putting privacy in that mix of, we want to keep everyone safe, but we've designed something that is completely anonymous, and you don't have to have concerns over privacy.
And Google's also published a number of documents related to the implementation of the exposure notification, some of which I've read pretty thoroughly, and they've made requirements that apps can't have or request certain permission inside the app itself. So it won't be able to ask for your GPS coordinates, for example. So people can't sneak that stuff in. And there will be, like, I don't want to say a rigorous assessment of the apps, because as we know, apps sometimes sneak through. But I think what they're trying to do is say, well, we're going to limit, in this case, Google, we're going to limit what access these apps have, and we're going to try to prevent, overreaching of privacy.
Yeah. So I'm also noticing, part of the same announcement, there have been some privacy advocates in Canada. One of them is the Canada Research Chair in Information Law and Policy. And she said, I think in the current climate, it would have been difficult to go with a different solution other than the most privacy protective one, because I do think that there is a trust deficit. So, I mean, that says a lot about a country that is so publicly concerned and doing everything they can to actually come up with a solution that protects both health and privacy of its citizens.
So sorry, I just want to cycle back. I see that there's a question from from Arvin, and the question was he wanted to know about the Life Labs cyber attack. What sort of findings and recommendations are expected by the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, and how serious is the threat? Now, from my understanding, the data that got leaked. So number one, the breach supposedly happened in October, and Life Labs notified everyone in December. So I believe that the breach notification. I don't. Amalia, do you know how long that breach notification is supposed to be?
I don't know for HIPAA. I don't know for health information what that period of time is. I know that there is still an investigation going on with Life Labs, so I know it's gone quiet, but it's really not quiet. So they are actually, they had appointed an acting CPO from KPMG.
Yes.
Someone that I know very well, is a well-known name in privacy, and that they're actually now hiring a permanent chief privacy officer.
Yeah, so a friend of mine who was on the breach list did mention that they did receive an email a week or two ago regarding the ongoing work that Life Labs is doing to address the security concerns and the breach that did happen. But Arvin, to answer your question in terms of the data that was leaked, it was lab tests, it was people's PII. So, like I said, date of birth, home address, phone numbers, login credentials, whatever was in Life Labs was pretty much exposed. Okay. Thanks, Arvin, for the question.
Okay, so now we're going to now that we know what's going on, why do we need to care? Why do we really need to care? And for some of you who are not so intimately involved with privacy issues, there could be some potentially irreversible consequences for people. That is why it's so important that anything a government is asking its citizens to do has been vetted by the privacy advocates, by security people, because everything that it ingests, it may come with irreversible consequences for some people. And then there's something else that's been evolving in law, which is this duty of care and fiduciary duty. So we're going to actually start with that to give you an understanding that even the law has been starting to keep in line with some of the responsibilities that have to be attributed to organizations. So we see a lot more coming up. And in Canada was never like this litigation type nation, but we see a lot more data breach lawsuits, including class action lawsuits. And that has been started with this Teague versus Jones, which was a case whereby an intrusion upon seclusion was recognized in the courts, meaning that people have the right to personal privacy and can be litigated. So it's not just the organization that is being held responsible, but it could become a civil action. So someone can, from the outside, a person can say, well, you know what, you've wronged me, so I can take you to court. That was not precedented in Canada. Then GDPR came, the European Data Protection Law came with this right to compensation and liability. There are securities fraud class action lawsuits because of misrepresentation. A misrepresentation on public statements, meaning that it's not just about the financials, but if you're saying, yeah, we are complying with, or we we protect personal data of people, and you don't, that can also be taken to court. Then we have directors' personal liabilities. Breach of fiduciary duties, and in Quebec in particular, we have a statutory requirement, and it goes into personal liability. On an aside, Quebec is actually they've just announced a bill to update their Act of Respecting the Protection of Personal Information, their Privacy Act. And they are basically updating it to align it to GDPR, which means there's going to be a lot more holding to account of organizations. For example, Life Labs, it would have, if something, a law like that would have been in effect, then the management, the board there would have actually been held to account. In fact, HIPAA has just been updated, and indeed the liabilities, the liability for the leaders of the organization, that has gone up. And there's so many other obligations that the leaders of organizations have, and now compounded with the fact that civil action can happen. So breach of contractual obligations, breach of legislation, potential lawsuits now could happen because of pandemic adverse actions of employers towards their staff. So there's a lot more happening right now, including the latest. I don't know if you've been following, but the Competition Bureau of Canada now is taking action, enforcement action against privacy violations. And we have seen the fine that they've given Facebook. It's only $9 million, but that is unprecedented for Canada. So it is very important. So it's not just, we have to build privacy into our application, mobile apps, and devices. It's a good thing to do. It's nice to have. No, it's actually, it's written in the law. You have to do it. Privacy in healthcare is now becoming a very big topic. Should you actually sign up for a contact tracing app? When I wrote the slides, there was no announcement that came recently. What are your considerations? What are you thinking about whether to install or not such an application and to participate? Because we know that if we don't have a critical mass, then that application is not going to do anything for anybody. How will we prevent false alarms? Who updates the app? What is happening when we are being asked for our temperature to be taken, and that we're going to see a little bit more about that. And there's the same thing that all the privacy advocates that I read about are talking about. Where's the data going? Where's it stored? Who has access to it? For how long are you going to keep it? So we constantly ask these questions because we know that is the most important part. It's the after. So first you collect it, but then what you do with it is very, very important and could have very wrong consequences. So I wanted to put this here about taking the temperature in airports because, and other things that we may need to experience in this almost it's not post-pandemic yet, but maybe. There are such huge differences between what countries do. In Netherlands, it is forbidden to take temperature in the airports, whereas Heathrow and in England and France, they have designated zones for screening. And we have no idea how private that is. It could be like you're marching around and just people take your temperature. Do they take a picture of your face and the temperature? I don't know, so it's all very concerning to me. Then we have, different countries being targeted. So here we're seeing the Czech Republic has designated separate gates for passengers arriving from Italy, or, in other areas where if they were coming from parts of China that were infected, which it's understandable, but that means profiling. That absolutely means we're targeting a group. And okay, so if we do it for the purposes of health, whatever, but are we going to do it forever? Are they going to have a tick mark on their passport forever because they come from that part of the world? Canadian airports have announced that international passengers will undergo additional screening, such as temperature and other symptomatic checks, and inquiries as to where they're coming from. Craig, you were mentioning to me that you know that people also were being checked on if they stay in quarantine for as long as they need to.
Yeah. So people that were crossing the border, they in some cases they'd either get a phone call to confirm that they're still staying in, or in some rare cases they had visits to their door.
And then the question that I asked before is this a temporary measure, or am I going to be taking temperature, like they're going to take it for, until a vaccine? We all are vaccinated. Are we all going to be vaccinated? What if I'm asymptomatic? What happens, And what about security checkpoints? To me, that is because last year I traveled a lot, and to me that was the most horrific moment in my travel when I had to go through airport security. Like, how is that going to work? And the one fun fact here is about hand sanitizers, right? Remember, they throw them out if they're bigger than a certain size, but now I need a big size sanitizer, right? So these are all very, very big questions that we still need to solve as we move forward. Then there's the issue of taking the temperature in the workplace. So I've done quite a bit of research on this because, it can lead to discrimination. It really can lead to stigma or a negative reaction from coworkers. Everybody manages their fears and their stress differently. So there have been some lawyers that have provided advice, and so I looked into that. The advice is, and I would say the airports should be the same, needs to be done in private, with a senior HR staff present, a medical person present. People need to feel like they're in like an inner, there's a shield around them, and this is very private. What is concerning, both in Canada and in the US, is that these checks are not subject to legislation. The US has a federal law called HIPAA. Canada does not have a federal level law that addresses personal health information. It is part of our personal PIPEDA, but it is not specific to health. So it is it has wide interpretation. So there are no such protections under the law because the business organizations are really not subject to health legislation. Ontario has health legislation, but again, it's very specific to hospitals, labs, that kind of thing, not for regular places of work. Employers have to think very carefully about whether or not to record this information, and definitely not in the personnel file. So I'm also telling you this because you should know that if you have an employer that is starting to act in a way that you don't feel is right, that there is a lot of legal advice out there, very good advice that tells you, that they shouldn't be doing this. This is not the right way to do it. So know your rights and know that you cannot be discriminated against whatever happened to you, especially if there's no conclusive evidence. Any questions at this point? Anyone wants to ask anything? If not, we are going to move forward. Right, so I wanted to call this slide The Curious Case of Benjamin Button because I think some of you may know the movie, may have watched the movie. And it occurred to me that we are very unprepared in terms of laws. Canada's PIPEDA is about 20 years old. Other bodies of law other than the European General Data Protection Regulation are very unprepared and very old laws. So we go back to those 8 dimensions of privacy, and we're seeing that, for example, temperature, nobody talks about that, by the way. Even the new biometrics law, like the Illinois Biometric Privacy Act, covers primarily biometric data in the context of potential identity theft, including access to finance sensitive information. What it doesn't cover is retina or iris scan. And so it limits kind of what the biometrics are. And you kind of start to wonder, so is now my face recognizable features and the temperature, they're going to now have to become part of a specific law? The Illinois Biometric Act does not say that human biological samples are included in the biometrics. So we're outside of the law yet again. I think the nature conspired to show us that the laws are lagging behind. So should people's body temperature be considered another personal identifier? I mean, I don't know. You know, it's like your heartbeat or your fingerprint or your eye scan. Currently, we have seen many cases where such identifiers were used in a discriminatory manner. So you could be denied access on a plane. We have seen a case of a mental health issue, a person that was denied access on a boat. She was going on a cruise, and her information was somehow accessed by police. And they had, I don't know, they had a database, you know, they got it from hospitals, I guess, and they were able to send it to the people boarding the cruise, and that person got stopped from going on vacation. So those are the kinds of things that, because we always have this conflict between law enforcement and our personal data, and how they're saying, yeah, no, but it's for security and it's for protection of people, and they use it the wrong way, or they use it excessively. In circumstances, they shouldn't be using it. I
just wanted to add here that there are a lot of false positives, false negatives with biometrics. And for those of you that may watch the Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, he actually did a special, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, on actual facial recognition software and the pitfalls of it. And one of the photos that they tried to get assessed was a photo of Oprah Winfrey, and biometrics couldn't actually tell who it was. Because of her darker skin tone, biometrics has a hard time doing proper analysis. So if you can't, tag Oprah, who's, one of the most popular faces, and it just goes to show you some of the drawbacks with biometrics, especially facial recognition.
Yeah, exactly. And now, especially now, when we are actually using face covers, which, makes me really, part of me as a privacy advocate really is really delighted, because we know that in certain countries, I'm not going to name which, the facial recognition is being deployed by the government in public places. So people are being surveilled all the time, and it is, and now apparently someone is working on some sort of recognition with filter this. So if you put a mask on, they still look at your, I don't know what kind of features in your eyes, and they're still going to be able to make a match. But is that match correct? So those are big issues that we are facing right now. And then this concept of right to be forgotten or right of erasure, right? How are we going to enforce that, if ever, with biometrics? So the problem with biometrics is that, especially if they are part of us physically, that, once it's gone wrong, it's gone wrong. I cannot redo my fingerprints. I'm not going to have a different fingerprint. So if something terrible happened, my fingerprints are now show me in a very adverse light, then I cannot undo that. There's nothing I can do personally. So, and as far as for us Canadians, this is an extract directly from our privacy law. PIPEDA allows organizations to collect, use, or disclose information only for purposes that a reasonable person would consider appropriate in the circumstances. As you can see, we're talking about reasonableness and circumstances. In those circumstances, it's reasonable in general. However, there is an exception. If the use or disclosure is for the purpose of acting in respect of an emergency that threatens life, health, or security of an individual, such as if an individual requires urgent medical attention and they are unable to communicate directly with medical professionals, that information can be disclosed. So this actually is, again, antiquated and has to be updated because, if the individual requires urgent medical attention, but what happens if it's a false positive and that information was lost in translation? So now we've disclosed all that information. Any questions? Any comments here? I don't know. Anything from you, Craig? Did you want to?
Nothing to add right now.
Well, I thought this is our last slide, I think, and I thought I would add a little bit of fun for the developer enthusiasts here. This is the right way to. So this is a project that was initiated by MIT in the United States, and it's called Safe Paths. And they're talking about broadcast and then about the technological intervention. And basically it is a guide on privacy by design, if you like. So they're telling you for the different contact tracing technology approaches, whether it's broadcast, select broadcast, unicast, participatory, what would be the impact on accuracy adoption and the different elements of privacy risks for carrier, privacy risks for local businesses, for users, non-users, consent, then other challenges like misinformation and risky behavior, etc. And as you can see here, for each type of technology approaches, it gives you a rating, whether it's limited, high, significant. This is a true privacy by design kind of chart that if you are ever to work in such an environment, it would be very important to really understand what are the consequences for how you apply that technology. And what are the risks and what are the challenges, if there's ways for you to take a different approach if things are of high risk, for example, and so on. So that's basically our last slide. Do you have any questions or?
So Jeff has a question, and the question was about if we foresee any adverse effects of increasing the general stigma of fitting the description as a result of facial recognition and its inaccuracies. And I'll take that, but yeah, I think, Jeff, we're already seeing that today, and that's happening quite often, especially with social media. You'll see people being accused of some heinous act and then finding out that people were trying to use facial recognition software, Google, open source technology to identify the perp, and they get the wrong person, and then that person then gets targeted, only to find out a week later or a couple days later that it wasn't actually him. He's in a different state, different country, or it just wasn't him in general. So I don't think it's something that's foreseeable. I think it's actually happening today. And yeah, there is that general stigma of fitting the description, and it is happening today with any sort of facial recognition software.
Yeah, so broader than that, advocates, privacy advocates, and one of them is an organization called Privacy International, but there's many of them, but they are very, very active on Twitter, and very active in general because they take matters to court. They are huge advocates for privacy rights. They talk a lot about artificial intelligence. They talk a lot about frameworks on how artificial intelligence can work, but in a way that it actually still follows the principles of privacy law. It still protects privacy. And so that is, I think, the most important takeaways. There are frameworks, and organizations actually need to implement those frameworks if they're going to use massive amounts of data and artificial intelligence to actually sift through the data and make sense of it. There are models out there, there are frameworks, there are the right ways to do it. I think the point is we cannot rush into monetization of applications that use these kinds of, facial recognition technologies, surveillance, profiling, until we actually have perfected the algorithms properly.
There's another question about from Eric saying, do you think the risk of data breach for uniques is underappreciated by regulars? And by uniques, he means those like who are COVID-19 positive users who are exposed by virtue of having contact with a single other user.
I personally do, and I'm going to draw a parallel that may not be quite appropriate for YouTube, but I will say it anyway. Do you guys remember when the recreational cannabis was allowed and the first stores online appeared in Ontario, and then there was a massive breach? That's all I'm going to say. Where the Privacy Commissioner of Canada came out with an announcement that said, well, we actually suggest that people go and buy using cash. And that to me was like the most awful thing anyone can say in this. I mean, so the only protection we have is don't put money in the bank, go put it under the mattress. Let's go back 50 years. Instead, let's do the right things to protect. So I do believe that there is a massive, especially with the way I've seen a lot of federal government initiatives, there is a massive opportunity for breach. Yeah. Unfortunately.
And one other thing to add to that, Eric, is that I think having single contact with one person, I think there might be a maybe an assumption that if you've only come in contact with somebody for the last 14 days, and it's a single person or a single unique ID, and you get diagnosed with COVID, I think there may be an assumption that that person might be someone that you're close to or nearby, or might know personally. So I don't know if the regulators are just ignoring that fact, but I think they're weighing the pros and cons and saying, well, if you've only come in contact with one person in 14 days, it's likely it's someone you know. But if, let's say, you're the one person and you've come in contact, like there's going to be at least, let's say you go to the grocery store, there's going to be at least 15 IDs in your phone, and your ID is going to be within 15 other people's phones. So I think there's a way to kind of limit the exposure to that single individual. Now, if it's one person, let's say me and my wife, she goes grocery shopping and she comes home, and the next thing you know, we install the app, and she gets diagnosed with COVID. I think there's a high probability there might only be one ID in my phone, which would be hers, if I never left the house for 14 days.
Yeah, so the moral to the story is don't get into anything unless you actually really understand, like Craig was describing, how he tried to really understand how that application works. If it satisfies your own gut instinct, then go for it, But if you don't feel that this is going to end up, in a way that you can live with, then don't.
I think so, Eric, I see your question here. What do you think of the solution to insert randomly seeded positive alerts and make that knowledge widespread? This would decrease the certainty of knowing who caused your alert. I think I understand what you're trying to do to obfuscate who may have been the person that you came in contact with. But the person, so let's say I get an alert on my phone that says I've come in contact with somebody. I'm not going to know who it is. I'm not going to know when it is. I just know that it's going to be within the last 14 days. If you put in alerts, I guess a really bad example would be, and I'm curious to see how our local health authorities are going to handle this, but let's say, for example, I as a person want to invoke fear in my community. I go to Walmart, I come home, and then I say, you know what, I've been diagnosed with COVID. I don't know how our local health organizations are going to manage that. I think what they're trying to do is try to at least limit the exposure, or limit the ability for someone to track down to an individual. And I think that's kind of the main intent there. So Jeff, your question, how does data retention work for COVID apps? Don't know yet. Amalia, do you know?
I don't, and that's the biggest question that we, and again, data retention for this type of use application should be very limited. So it should be exactly, if those 14 days, whatever happened, and these IDs come in contact, they should be eliminated. There should be no need to keep something unless there is a positive test. And then even for that, for how long should those be kept? Because with privacy, the idea is that you need a unique purpose. So is it for the purpose of just keeping track and making sure that these patients are isolated, they don't come in contact with anyone else, etc.? Or is it now to feed other purposes, the health, Public Health Canada wants, such as, how many people got sick in the last whatever, for how long, what else secondary purposes do they need that information for? And is that something, again, that will keep the anonymity and so on? So we don't know, because we don't know what else they're tracking.
One interesting scenario that I've thought of, Jeff, is let's say you are diagnosed with COVID and you alert, you send out the alert, you consent to sharing your data with your local health authority. Are they going to surveil you? Now that'll be an interesting kind of aspect to this, because now that your phone has been flagged as, or your device or your unique ID has been flagged, are they going to be able to collect information to see if you've if your phone has now shared its key with other keys, or has your phone received keys from other, or IDs from other phones? Because then that would mean that you're coming in close contact with somebody. So while they're not collecting your GPS coordinates, they could. And I have no idea how this is going to look. I hope that doesn't happen, but you never know. Are they going to be able to surveil that ID and go, well, we're now going to watch you to make sure that you aren't leaving your house, or you're coming in close contact with other people that aren't that haven't been diagnosed with COVID. So,
and the other thing could be, are you potentially, maybe you got infected? So what happens then? So these are all these are different scenarios that I don't know how they're going to use the data because of these scenarios. More questions than answers.
So Eric has another question. So GDPR allows for using consent-contained constrained data for secondary purposes if it's been de-identified to a certain degree. How do you feel about making participation mandatory with data sets with de-ID'd? Amalia, you want to take that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very interesting question, because de-identified data, again, it depends for how guaranteed is that there's going to be no possibility of re-identification. It also depends on how big the data sets are. So if if things are done in a way which make it absolutely impossible to re-identify, then sure. I mean, you know, if that's the new norm, absolutely. But if the protections are actually properly implemented, that's the big question. And again, GDPR is GDPR. It doesn't apply to Canada. So we actually don't know how de-identified data works in Canada at this point, and how the health authorities work with it.
Okay, so there was another question from Judy. What do you think about the opt-in model and adoption rates? Do you think we'll see particular industries and private companies mandating the app for their employees?
Wow, that is a very tough question.
So I'll take a crack at it. So I think the opt-in model is obviously a good option, but I think from a consumer standpoint or from a patient standpoint, we need to understand what data is going to be shared. Now, Judy, I don't know if you saw the piece with the slide on BC Health and the information that I found that was being leaked, but I think our hope would be that that wouldn't be the same case, and we as consumers may never know until a researcher decides to open up the app and see what actually is happening under the hood. But I think from an adoption standpoint, I think it's going to be hard. A lot of people don't like surveillance to begin with. There will be those that want to have it because they want to be in the know. They want to have news, and they want to be maybe an active participant in the community. I don't know what that means, but let's say that that's kind of what they as an individual want to do. Or but from a standpoint of what industry or private companies are going to mandate this, that'll be even harder. That might be kind of what Amalia was alluding to before about knowing our rights and not being discriminated against. And I think further to that is, you know, some organizations don't have, you know, corporate issued devices. So who are they to mandate that you need to install this app on your phone? And again, it's opt-in. So even if I do install the app and I am diagnosed with COVID, I don't need to, you know, go in and say that I was diagnosed with it.
Yeah, and I think from a privacy perspective, that would be a surveillance tool. And that is definitely a no-no for Canada anyway. There's no way that an employer can mandate that. I don't think so. I think that's going to be a huge scandal, and I don't think they're going to be allowed to do that. As a condition of employment, absolutely not. No. Any other questions? I can't see the chat, so unless I stop sharing. Okay, now I can.
No, I don't think there are any more.
A bit of an active conversation, but no other questions right now.
Oh, so
Judy, I'd like to just point out here the DID data for secondary purposes. Yeah, they could be useful, but again, it's managing that data and how you're going to DID that data, how you're going to sanitize it. Yes, it could be helpful for future public health analysis, but if that data can somehow be correlated with other data sets, it may be able to you know, ID the actual people that provided that data. So yeah, I think there's that risk of maintaining or retaining that data. So is there any more questions?
Doesn't sound like it. Doesn't look like it. Okay.
Well, thank you, OWASP, and thank you everyone for participating in this live stream. I know it's 8 o'clock, so hopefully you guys got something out of this. If you guys have questions, Amalia and my email address are on the last slide, so you guys are welcome to send us a note. We're also on LinkedIn, so you can connect with us there. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you guys for your presentation. Yeah, like Craig said, if you guys have any other questions or concerns, you can definitely reach out to them on LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you guys for coming to watch our presentation. If you guys have any concerns or questions about our streaming format, definitely check out the feedback form that we have in the description. That's also where you can go if you're looking for CPE credits. And yeah, also, we do have an event next month planned. That is the Command and Control CTF event with Security Innovations. You can find the details of that on Meetup already. And yeah, big thanks to our sponsors as well. They are HP, Checkmark, Security Compass, Sonatype, Security Innovation, Amazon, and Spotify. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
And thank you, Amalia and Craig.
Guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.